The roller coaster is not the problem. The problem is our relationship to the roller coaster.
Jerry Colonna, our guest today, is the co-founder and CEO of Reboot.io, where he believes that work does not have to destroy us. We're going to talk a lot more about that and mental health today. Jerry is a leadership coach and writer and speaker, but mostly Jerry is an old friend who I'm really excited to have here today.
And incredibly handsome and thoughtful. No, just
handsome, thoughtful, mighty, strong. Exactly.
Right.
All the good things, and yet vulnerable. I've known Jerry for almost 30 years. He was one of my first business mentors when I was a young entrepreneur in Silicon Alley. Jerry and his partner Fred were the most sought after venture capitalists in the business, at least on the East Coast. And we were really excited to work with him and discovered a lot of great things about Jerry along the way. And then 20 years ago, you made this really radical transformation into a coach and speaker and writer about many things related to mental health and the entrepreneur's journey, and we'll sort of get into that. I was thinking maybe we'd sort of get into what led you to this transformation for those who haven't read your books.
Oh, simply put, it was a broken heart. To be more specific about it, I was in my late 30s and I was living the dichotomy of outward success and inner misery. And during those years when I was, quote, one of the most highly sought after VCs on the East Coast, at least, what was happening was that the more success I had externally, the more profound the dichotomy was, the split was. And as you know, I had had a lifelong relationship with depression going back to childhood. I think one of the adaptations that I developed in my early 20s was, I used to dance really fast. I would perform really well. And by the time my late 30s started rolling around, the performative nature in which I was living my life ended up becoming a kind of demon inside of me. Mm-hmm. And it just caused me to, well, if I hadn't walked away from the business, I probably would have killed myself. That's how intense the depression was.
Yeah. One of the many things I want to sort of get into with you today is why your work has specifically focused on entrepreneurs. And one of my theses on that is that part of this is that the nature of the job forces a sort of performative act for many people who are building businesses. They got to be killing it. Everything's great. They have to tell that to the world, to their investors, to their customers, et cetera. And it takes something that I think is part of the human condition anyways and amplifies it. At least that's my thesis. I'm curious for you, as you work through that for yourself, how that then manifested in the work that you do with entrepreneurs, and if that observation resonates at all.
Well, the first thing I'll respond with, and I'll say it and then put it to the side, is my work has expanded beyond entrepreneurs. And the reason that's relevant to say is that the things I'm about to speak to are actually more universal than I realized. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the consequences of having written Reboot. And it was published in 2019. And to this day, I continue to get responses from people who speak to the universality of the experiences I wrote about in the book, mine and those of my clients, and how so many of the themes that you're touching upon are, in fact, part of the human condition. So let me put that to the side, though. I think you're right. There is the performative nature of we're crushing it. When I started 11 years ago doing these retreats we call boot camps, the first night of the boot camp, I would get really sort of like a Baptist minister, and I'd walk around the room in this circle and everybody would be like, what the hell is happening? And Jerry would be leaning into them. And I would say, nobody's fucking crushing it. You're all bullshitting. And as much as it was kind of the Brooklyn in me coming out and sort of naming things, the reason that works is that it actually cuts through the performative nature, and it causes people to look around to their left and to their right and realize everybody's faking it,
Right.
which is a powerful experience.
And not only is everybody faking it, everybody's aware that I feel like imposter syndrome is universal. And again, as one of these things is perhaps is dialed up in entrepreneurs even more than everybody else.
Well,
again, because of the nature of the job.
Yeah, well, because of the nature of the job, but also because of the nature of fundraising. Right. The fundraising process, which is a sales process, essentially, and our friends who are leaders in publicly traded companies have their own version of this. Nobody who is considering buying stock in a company, which is essentially what fundraising is, wants to hear from senior leadership, I don't really have a fucking clue as to what I'm doing. Right? That's not the message.
Not sure why we didn't hit the numbers this quarter.
I don't know. Maybe the product will work. I don't know. Right? So
probably my fault.
So that exacerbates a normal part of this. But what is it really exacerbating, Mark? What it's exacerbating is another phenomena which is equally universal, which is the attachment of the sense of self-esteem to external sources. Mm-hmm. Okay. William James, the father of modern psychology, said, it is not failure that annihilates us, but it's when we attach our sense of self-esteem and self-worth to an accomplishment of a goal and then fail to achieve the goal that we are annihilated. In Reboot, in chapter 7, I open up the book by talking about what I refer to as life on the roller coaster. And as an entrepreneur, you understand the roller coaster quite well, right? You get a success and you feel like you're king of the world. And then you have a failure and you feel like you're the worst piece of shit. And you're up and down and up and down and up and down. And I make 2 points. The first is, we see the roller coaster. We know that we're living on a roller coaster. And we compound the negative experience of being on the roller coaster by thinking that being on the roller coaster is bad. And so it's yet more ammunition for the imposter that we are, the bullshit artist that we are. Okay, here's the truth. Life is filled with roller coasters. Life is filled with roller coasters. You come home and it turns out that a loved one is diagnosed with an illness. Or it turns out some great success happens and everybody's thrilled. This is life unfolding as it's supposed to unfold. What Buddhism teaches us is that the trick is not to stop the roller coaster. The trick is to stop riding the roller coaster. The trick is to not attach a sense of self-worth to the ups, because we will for sure attach our sense of self-worth to the downs.
Mm-hmm. And how does one do that? And so one of the things that's really interesting for me, because we started this podcast in part because we have a company that is the goal of which is to help people live their best lives, help to alleviate anxiety and depression. We think we have a mental health crisis in this country and in this world, and it is exacerbated by all sorts of things, from the dopamine machine in our pocket to the information overload that we all have, and a variety of things that have nothing to do with the sort of evolutionary psychology history of our species, et cetera. I think all the time about what are the best ways to heal people with words. People have many approaches to helping us wrestle with the dilemma of humanity. But our mission at Jimini, which I think is very similar to your mission at Reboot, is essentially to help people live their best possible lives and, in effect, to heal through words. As I understand it, your most important influences have been some sort of combination of Jungian therapy and Buddhism and the sort of radical self-inquiry that is a function of, I really think of both. And I'm so curious about your journey there and the relationship between that and many of the other ways that people think about healing with words, and sort of how you pull different threads from many different learnings and traditions and tie them together.
What occurs to me is to reflect back, a kind of position or a kind of question, which is, please find for me the wisdom tradition, either from Western psychology, philosophy, or Eastern philosophy, please find the wisdom tradition that says one should attach one's sense of self to external sources. I'll wait.
I think we do a lot of that in America. I'm not sure it's a wisdom tradition.
That's why that's what I'm talking about. It's a wisdom tradition. I mean, so what you're talking about, you're right. We do a lot of it. There are roots even in the Protestant work ethic. The notion that outward success is an expression of God's grace. You could argue that some of the roots of capitalism itself are rooted in your sense of unworthiness. Right. And so in order for you to feel good about yourself, you have to buy the right deodorant or drive the right car. You said before that depression and anxiety are at epidemic levels. I agree with that. I understand that. I experienced that. And there's almost nothing new about this.
Right.
The mechanisms that we use to make each other feel bad are expanding and are equally universal.
The dopamine machine in our pocket that lets us understand just how poorly we're doing relative to the external presentation that everybody else gives is just so challenging. I mean, it's challenging I'm 54 years old. It's hard for me. I cannot imagine what it's like for a 15-year-old.
Right. And we're fortunately doing good research and talking about this. You know, there are bans on social media that are being talked. But I think what's missing is that we're not promulgating the resilience building mechanisms that our wisdom traditions have taught us. I don't care if it's the desert fathers, the Christian desert fathers, from thousands of years ago to the Greek philosophers to the Buddha himself. There are long-standing traditions of ways in which we are to build the resilience and to withstand this natural tendency. Once again, the roller coaster is not the problem.
Yeah.
The problem is our relationship to the roller coaster.
Yeah. I agree in general, we don't do enough. I will say, as a father of small children, I am pleased to see what's happened with sort of the notion of growth mindset and this notion of grit that we have. You're seeing more and more of in elementary and secondary education, sort of ways to teach children. I think of that as a form of helping them understand that, like, doing things is hard. You don't get it right the first time. You don't always get it right ever. And you are okay even if you don't. The more important thing is that you tried than whether or not you were the brilliant child, et cetera. And I live in Palo Alto. I don't know whether, growth mindset and grit is something that they're teaching everywhere, but my sense is that is at least one positive trend in education, I hope, that will help to make more resilient children, but we'll see.
I just reached for my book, and you're going to have to put up with me reading a little bit of something I've written before. Please do,
yes.
This is from a section called The Loving Kindness of True Grit. I often speak of resiliency, and no matter how much I try to do otherwise, I still manage to come across as if I'm speaking about grit. So I'll speak about grit. True grit is more than the capacity to grin and bear it. To understand true grit, we need to understand false grit. False grit is brittle. It's the sense that we are nothing if we can't take a punch. In fact, we define taking a punch as the ability to not feel pain when we are punched. False grit is dangerous. It feeds a stubbornness that in turn can feed delusion. We mistake the tendency to delude ourselves that our relationship will improve, our companies will succeed, if only we double down on our old patterns, grip the steering wheel until our knuckles whiten, and bear down. Stubbornness is not the hallmark of a warrior. So true grit and false grit. True grit is supple. True grit is equanimity. True grit is the ability to withstand the ups and downs of the roller coaster and realize that I am lovable and worthy of love. regardless of where that roller coaster is.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I mean? It's by detaching our sense of self. If you can teach your children to detach their sense of self and enjoy the pursuit of the goal, regardless of whether they succeed, that's true grit.
I love that. And I think that's true for children. Of course, it's also true for adults. And in the context of the work you do with entrepreneurs and how I think about entrepreneurs and company building, et cetera, I think it's very much true inside a company too. And I think of false grit in a corporate context is pretending you're fine all the time. I've always thought it was fascinating, and I know you talk about this a lot. I always thought it was fascinating, the notion of, quote, professional.
Right.
In effect means not human. It means I don't feel emotions. I am so professional that I would never cry in the workplace. I am so professional that I won't feel emotion.
Right. Or that getting punched in the face doesn't hurt.
Right.
Right. I'm a former boxer. I will tell you, right, my nose has been broken. It hurts. Okay. What you don't want to do is stand in the ring and get punched in the face. What you want to do is slip the damn punch.
Right.
Which means you need to be supple and resilient and smart and let go of attachments that get in the way.
Well, so letting go of the attachments that get in the way. So this is interesting because I think a lot of what we've talked about so far is related to the roller coaster and the attachment that people have to the roller coaster and feeling that they are as good or as bad as where they are on the roller coaster ride. A lot of the work you do is related to understanding your past and self-inquiry. And I'm curious sort of how those two come together. And one of the things that's really interesting, so at Jimini, our focus, our sort of therapeutic focus, as it were, for folks, at least to start, is CBT. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the work that happens with CBT, as you know, is sort of teasing out the differences between thoughts and feelings and behaviors and understanding that while they can influence each other, they don't have to. And a thought is just a thought, et cetera. There has historically, I think, been a little bit of tension in the psychoanalytic world, for example, between what I would characterize as psychology of the present. Here's what you're thinking now, or here's what you're feeling now, and here's how to deal with such things, versus the self-inquiry. And I tend to think it's a false dichotomy, but I'm curious about the radical self-inquiry piece of the work that you do and how you think that ultimately influences people in the today to help make them more resilient and maybe less anxious or less depressed and better able to slip the punch, et cetera, and how that process works.
So you're right that there's a tension. It's a tension in the psychological psychotherapy world. Yeah. And it's simplistic and not entirely accurate to describe, say, CBT on the one end, cognitive behavioral therapy, and psychoanalysis on the other end, as two opposites or two poles. And yet there is something to that framing. Carl Jung, a psychoanalyst, said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. I think that is a profound summation of what I was trying to reach for when I coined the term radical self-inquiry. Why do I do the things that I do? Or more specifically, why do I repeatedly do the things that I do?
Yeah, you talk a lot about ghosts in the machine, which is a wonderful metaphor.
It's a set of programming that we're barely conscious to. And the reason it's important to surface these things is that cognitive awareness alone does not create transformation. Even in a CBT world, where cognitive awareness is a critical component, you still have to have repetition and exploration. See, behind the tension that you're talking about is a fear mark. And the fear is if I open up that messy closet, all the shit in the closet's going to tumble down upon me and I'm going to get buried. I don't know what to do with the fact that my conflict avoidance as a CEO stems from the fact that I watched my father hit my mother.
Right. And you have there's a quote in Reboot, which is, I am not what has happened to me. I am what I choose to become.
Carl Jung.
Which I think is wonderful, but very hard to manifest. It's hard work to get to the point of, I am not what has happened to me. I think this is like an essential thing. Like it feels embedded.
Put the two Carl Jung quotes together. The first quote, until you make the unconscious conscious, what Carl Jung is saying is nothing's going to change until you surface what in fact has gone on.
Mm-hmm.
But the fear is, I won't be able to become what I want to become.
Right.
I'm going to get buried under the past. Everybody has a closet. Everybody has a messy junk drawer. Okay. You can ignore it. But if you open the door and unpack everything and pull it all out, you can sort out what needs to stay and what needs to be given to Goodwill. You get to give away a lot of the shit that you don't need to carry anymore. But here's the most important part. The goal is to then put everything back in little shoe boxes, label the shoe boxes, and stick them back on the top of the closet and close the door again. But now you don't have to be afraid to open the door because it's all organized. And the past will not haunt you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Ignoring the past does not stop it from haunting you. It creates ghosts in the machines.
Mm-hmm.
That's the challenge that we have.
Fascinating. And I should mention this because I did not mention it earlier in the intro. So for those of you, Jerry has two books, Reboot, which was the first book, which came out 5 years ago. 2019. Okay. And just recently, Reunion, both of which are wonderful. Jerry, thank you so much for the time today. This has been terrific. I am looking forward to lots more conversations here.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the work you're doing, Mark. You know, when we use the patterns of our own life to create the means by which we're helping others, we're doing saintly work. So thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.